Most men think the most dangerous words a woman can say are the loud ones, the arguments, the accusations, the dramatic moments where emotions explode. But the truth is far more unsettling, because the words that quietly reveal the future of your relationship are often spoken calmly, sometimes even gently. And if you don't understand what they actually mean, you may miss the moment when everything begins to change. As a psychologist, I've watched countless men focus on the wrong signals. They analyze tone, body language, text messages, but they overlook the most important clues, the words themselves, not the obvious ones, the subtle ones. Because when a woman reaches a certain emotional point in a relationship, she begins revealing her true state of mind through phrases that sound harmless, but carry deep psychological meaning. The first phrase is something many men hear and completely misunderstand. I just need some space. Now listen carefully, because space itself is not a bad thing. Healthy relationships allow room for individuality. Everyone needs time to think, breathe, and reconnect with themselves. But when this phrase appears suddenly in a relationship that once felt emotionally close, it often signals something deeper happening inside her mind. Women rarely ask for emotional distance unless they are already feeling it. This doesn't necessarily mean the relationship is ending, but it means her emotional system is overwhelmed, conflicted, or pulling back. And here is the mistake many men make in that moment. They panic. They try to close the distance immediately. They send more messages. They ask more questions. They push harder for reassurance. But pressure rarely repairs emotional distance. In fact, it often makes it worse. When someone asks for space and receives emotional pressure instead, their mind begins associating the relationship with stress rather than comfort. A wiser response is calm awareness. Space is often a signal that something inside the relationship needs reflection. The second phrase women use is even more subtle and often more revealing. I don't know what I want right now. This sentence carries enormous psychological weight, because most people actually know more about their feelings than they admit. When someone says they don't know what they want, it often means they are experiencing conflicting emotions they haven't resolved yet. Part of her may still care deeply about you, but another part may be questioning the direction of the relationship. And uncertainty creates emotional hesitation. Again, many men respond with urgency. They try to convince her why the relationship should continue. They argue logically. They remind her of memories, promises, plans. But attraction and emotional certainty are not created through persuasion. They grow through experience and emotional clarity. Trying to force clarity from someone who feels confused often pushes them further into doubt. And here is something many men don't realize. When a woman expresses uncertainty honestly, she is actually giving you valuable information about her emotional state. It may not be comfortable to hear, but it is truthful. And truth always provides more power than illusion, because when you understand what someone truly feels, you can decide how you want to respond, rather than chasing a version of the relationship that may no longer exist. The men who handle these moments with maturity do something very different. They remain calm. They listen carefully. And most importantly, they maintain their own emotional stability instead of reacting with fear. Why? Because emotional strength during uncertain moments reveals a man's true character. And sometimes, that quiet strength becomes the very thing that helps a relationship find clarity again. But ignoring the meaning behind these words, pretending they don't matter, that's where many men lose control of the situation without even realizing it. Because relationships rarely collapse suddenly, they shift slowly, one honest sentence at a time. There is another sentence women say that many men completely misread, and when you hear it, it often feels harmless, almost casual. But psychologically, it can reveal something far deeper happening beneath the surface. The phrase is simple: you deserve someone better. At first, many men interpret this as a compliment. It sounds kind, even respectful. It sounds like she's acknowledging your value. But listen carefully to the psychology behind those words. When a woman says this, She is often revealing something about how she sees the relationship, and more importantly, how she sees herself within it. Sometimes it means she feels guilt. Perhaps she believes she cannot give the emotional effort the relationship deserves. Perhaps she feels disconnected but doesn't want to hurt you directly. Other times it means she has already emotionally stepped back and is trying to soften the reality of that distance. The sentence becomes a cushion for a truth that feels difficult to express openly, and this is where many men make a critical mistake. They argue with the statement. They respond by saying things like, "No, you're perfect for me," or "I don't want anyone else." But when someone has reached the point of saying you deserve better, they are usually speaking from an internal conclusion they've already been thinking about. Trying to convince them otherwise rarely changes that internal decision. Instead, it often creates the opposite effect. Because the more a man tries to prove he wants her despite her doubts, the more pressure she may feel. And pressure can transform uncertainty into emotional withdrawal. A wiser response requires something most people struggle with: self-respect combined with emotional calm. When a man hears this phrase and remains grounded instead of desperate, it changes the emotional dynamic entirely. It shows that he values himself enough to hear the truth without begging for a different answer. And strangely enough, that calm strength often commands far more respect than emotional pleading ever could. Now, there is another phrase that appears frequently in relationships that are quietly shifting. "I still care about you." On the surface, this sounds reassuring. But psychologically, the words "still care" often reveal something subtle. Notice what is missing. The words passion, excitement, and emotional certainty. Caring is gentle. Caring is polite. But caring alone is not the same as being deeply invested in a romantic relationship. When someone emphasizes that they care about you, it sometimes means their feelings have softened into something more distant. Affection without intensity, warmth without the spark that once existed. And again, many men react by trying to reignite the connection through effort. More messages, more attention. More attempts to remind her of the relationship's value, but emotions cannot be reignited through pressure. They can only return when both people feel naturally drawn back into the connection. This is why emotional maturity matters so much in relationships. When you understand what certain phrases often reveal, you stop reacting with panic. You begin listening more carefully. You begin watching whether actions align with the words being spoken. Because words tell part of the story, but behavior tells the rest. And sometimes the most important thing a man can do is not immediately respond, but observe. Observe whether the distance grows or whether it begins to close naturally. Observe whether the relationship still moves forward or slowly begins to fade. That observation gives you something incredibly valuable: clarity. And clarity protects you from chasing a version of love that may only exist in memory. Because the strongest men in relationships are not the ones who refuse to hear uncomfortable truths. They are the ones who listen carefully and respond with dignity rather than fear. There is another phrase women say that can quietly change the entire emotional direction of a relationship. And when men hear it, they often assume it means the relationship is simply going through a temporary phase. But psychologically, it can reveal a much deeper shift. The phrase is this: "I think we're moving too fast." Now, on the surface, that sentence sounds reasonable. Healthy relationships often benefit from slowing down and building connection naturally. But context is everything. When this phrase appears suddenly, especially after a period of emotional closeness, it can signal that her feelings have started to retreat. Sometimes a woman says this because the intensity of the relationship began to feel overwhelming. Maybe expectations grew too quickly. Maybe she feels pressure she wasn't ready for. But other times, the phrase reflects something more complicated. Her emotions may have changed, but she doesn't yet know how to express that clearly. So instead of saying "my feelings are different now," the mind chooses a softer explanation. "We're moving too fast." It allows distance to appear gradually rather than abruptly. And here is where many men unintentionally make the situation worse. They try to negotiate the pace of the relationship. They say things like, "Okay, we can slow down," or "Tell me what pace works for you." Now those responses come from a good place. They show willingness to adapt and care about her comfort. But if the deeper issue is emotional uncertainty rather than speed, adjusting the pace won't solve the real problem. Because the pace was never the issue. The emotional connection was. This leads to another phrase that can be equally revealing. "I just have a lot going on right now." Again, this statement sounds completely reasonable. Life becomes busy. Stress happens. Responsibilities increase. Work, family, personal challenges. All of these things can affect someone's availability in a relationship. But when this phrase appears repeatedly while emotional engagement simultaneously decreases, it can signal something else. It may mean the relationship is no longer occupying the same priority in her emotional world. Human beings naturally create time for what feels important to them, not because they are obligated, but because they want to. When someone consistently says they are too busy while also becoming less emotionally present, the pattern becomes meaningful. This doesn't mean she is lying. It means her attention may simply be shifting toward other areas of her life, and that shift changes the emotional balance between two people. Many men respond to this moment by trying to become more understanding. They give unlimited flexibility. They lower their expectations. They try to be as accommodating as possible. But there is a difference between being supportive and silently accepting emotional distance. Support respects someone's challenges, but self-respect recognizes when effort is no longer mutual. And this is where emotional awareness becomes incredibly important. Because relationships thrive on reciprocity. Both people investing, both people showing interest, both people making space for each other in their lives. When that balance begins to fade, something deeper than scheduling is often happening. And ignoring that reality doesn't restore the connection. It simply delays the moment when clarity becomes unavoidable. The most emotionally strong men do something different when they hear these phrases. They listen carefully, but they also observe behavior over time. Do the words match the actions? Does the distance grow or shrink? Is the connection slowly rebuilding or slowly fading? Because relationships rarely end with a single sentence. They evolve through patterns, and understanding those patterns allows you to respond with calm awareness rather than emotional reaction. When you stop chasing explanations and start observing reality, you begin seeing relationships with a level of clarity many people never reach. And that clarity protects something incredibly important. Your ability to choose relationships where your presence is genuinely valued rather than tolerated. There is one final sentence that reveals more about the future of a relationship than almost any other, and when a woman says it, many men feel a strange sense of discomfort, even if they can't immediately explain why. The phrase sounds gentle, almost harmless. "I just want us to be happy." Now listen closely, because those words can mean two very different things depending on the emotional context behind them. In a healthy relationship, that sentence can be sincere. It can reflect a desire for mutual growth, peace, and long-term connection. But when it appears during moments of emotional distance or uncertainty, it can sometimes signal something else entirely. It can mean she is mentally preparing for a change. Sometimes people use this phrase when they are struggling with a decision they haven't fully expressed yet. A decision about the future of the relationship. And instead of speaking that decision immediately, they frame it in a way that feels compassionate. "I just want us to be happy." The words create a sense of kindness around something that may eventually become difficult. And this is where many men begin searching desperately for reassurance. They ask questions like, "Are you happy with me?" Or, "Is something wrong between us?" But reassurance requested from fear rarely produces real clarity. Because when someone feels emotionally uncertain, being pushed for immediate answers often increases their hesitation rather than resolving it. The deeper truth about relationships is something most people learn only after painful experience. Words matter, but patterns matter more. One sentence alone rarely defines the future of a relationship. But repeated phrases that signal emotional distance, confusion, or hesitation often reveal something important. And here is the lesson that changes how strong men navigate relationships. They don't just listen to comforting words. They watch consistent behavior. Because behavior always reveals emotional truth over time. A woman who is truly invested will naturally make space for connection in her life. She will communicate openly, show curiosity about your world, and demonstrate that the relationship matters to her. You won't feel like you are constantly trying to decode hidden meanings. But when the emotional energy begins fading, the signs slowly appear. Distance in conversations, uncertainty in words, less enthusiasm for shared time, not always dramatic, but noticeable. And this is the moment where a man's emotional maturity becomes incredibly important. Some men react with fear. They cling tighter. They chase reassurance. They try to force the relationship back into the version they remember. But attraction and connection cannot be forced through pressure. The stronger path is something quieter: observation, patience, self-respect. A man who values himself does not ignore his intuition when something feels different. But he also does not react with anger or desperation. He listens. He watches. He allows the truth of the situation to reveal itself through time. Because the right relationship will never require constant emotional guessing. It will feel stable, mutual, balanced. Two people choosing each other freely. Not one person constantly trying to convince the other to stay. And once you understand this, you stop fearing difficult conversations or uncomfortable truths. Instead, you begin valuing clarity. Because clarity protects your time, your emotional energy, and your future. So let me ask you something honest before you leave this video. Have you ever heard one of these phrases in a relationship and only later realized it meant something deeper than you understood at the time? If you have, write, "I see the signs now," in the comments. Your story might help another man recognize a pattern he's currently living through. And if this conversation helped you understand relationship psychology on a deeper level, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a friend who might need to hear this message today. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a man can learn about relationships is how to listen carefully when the quietest words reveal the biggest truths.